having this hearing. I think this is probably one of the most important issues that we can be discussing in the legislature. And a little bit of background, because you've given some national data, and California really is a little bit different than other states. We have the largest poverty rate in the country. We have the largest number of youngsters who are English language learners. And in most parts of California, we have the highest cost of living. Our schools face an almost impossible task, and that's choosing which valuable programs to fund and which valuable programs to starve. And every time we have to make that choice, they're clear losers, and it's the children of California. There's no lack of research on what we must do to support our children. We know what smart investments are, and they all cost money. High-quality teachers, a full curriculum, early education, after school, nurses, librarians, counselors, technology, small class sizes, strong education leaders. The question we're asking, and I think that you have to look at, is right now we're asking which of these do we fund and which of these do we starve? That's what is happening at our schools. But what we haven't done is create a stable, long-term plan to invest more in education. You know, if our children were doing well with the funding that we have, we wouldn't be here. Since the Great Recession, we've lifted California out of a terrible, huge hole in funding. We went from being really terrible and awful, and now we're just plain bad. California has the 6th largest economy in the world, the largest GDP of any state, and yet we rank on nearly every measure of achievement, school funding, and school staffing below the national average. California is below the achievement level of most other states on the nation's report card. Our most recent standardized tests, we have a significant number of children who don't meet those standards. But I'll give you some numbers that I saw from 2014, that the average effort that other states put in is about 3.3%. And in California, it was just 2.7%. That's 2014. It's probably changed a little bit. That would mean that California ranked 45th in the nation in its effort to invest in education. And there were calculations that if we just match the effort of other states, that would mean an additional $12 billion. What would it take to move California up to what are the highest performing states? And let me just be very clear with you. As a parent, as a member of the PTA, as someone who really cares about education, I want our kids to be the highest performing kids in the nation. What would it take to get up to that range? And the estimates are it would take about $22 to $40 billion more per year. That is a huge jump. So that's why the California State PTA asked for this hearing, because we want you to start to create a remedy. We want you to start to create a plan. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we would love it. And I think the children of California and the parents and all the communities would say, thank you, California legislature, for finally grappling with this issue, for finally saying, yes, we're going to create a long-term plan to bring California within the top 10 states in funding and performance. Money would go to make sure that our teachers have competitive wages, that they're not like the teachers in San Francisco having to have 2 or 3 jobs in order to live in the city. That it would be wages, it would be professional development, it would be strengthening our administrators, it would be making sure that we had a small class size, that we had a full curriculum, art, and music, and civics. We would have career technical education. Every school would have counselors that they needed. Every school would have librarians. Schools would have nurses. Schools would have all of those things that the research tells us help children do better in school. Yes. Because of a lot of variables. One of them is we have severe increased pension costs. One of them is our teachers have been not paid as the economy has grown, and a lot of them simply can't afford to live in our communities. So we have a tremendous, severe shortage of teachers. People aren't going into the teacher workforce. We don't even have people in our schools who say, I want to be a teacher, because they see right now they can't afford to be a teacher. Teachers are not respected because of a lot of things that have happened in education. And so,
Mr. Morlock, you want to ask a couple questions?
Well, yes, Mr. Chair, you have just brought an incredible panel here. We get to listen to people talk to us. Now we're engaged in a discussion.
That's why I wanted to do
This
it.
is amazing. You have, Ms. Kosovar, you have what I would call drop the whole load.
thank you.
Kind of a punchline to a joke, but you've dropped the whole load. So Senator Jackson talked about metrics. So Ms. Parker and Mr. Griffith, you seem to be answering these questions really well, and I really appreciate having someone in the room that has the whole country. So let me just ask, in other states, what is the percentage of charter schools?
That's a really good question, and we can get that for you. I would say there are some states that you look at, like Arizona and Michigan, that have a high percentage of kids that attend charter schools. But nationally, the percentage of kids is somewhere in the 10% range or less. So the majority of kids still attend what we think of as traditional schools. Again, it varies from state to state, and there are still a handful of states that do not have any charter schools.
The next question, just to keep it all brief, is do you keep databases on how many public teachers, school teachers, that send their kids to private schools?
No, we don't, and I don't know anyone who would have that, because you'd have to ask the kids. First off, we have very little on private school information because private schools don't have to report. And so what we have is there's a survey that's done by the federal government to private schools each year, and it's a voluntary survey, and some participate and some don't.
What I'm asking is Ms. Kosovar has just really just given an indictment. And so I'm looking for other areas. And so when I see someone saying our school system isn't working, therefore we will start charters. Therefore, we're not even sending our own kids to public school as teachers, we're sending them to private schools. And that number is rather high, but it's, I think, a barometer that's saying something about the school system. So just to,
I can join in a little bit if you want to talk about numbers. And that is, and I'm talking about the independent charter schools, the sort of elite independent charter schools, where their tuition is, $30,000, $40,000 a year. So we're talking about a huge difference in investment between the schools, those independent charter schools, and what our public schools aren't investing in. And when you say it was an indictment, I'm a strong supporter of public education, and I'm not here to indict public education. I'm here to support public education. I strongly believe that public money should be paid for public schools, and charter schools are public schools. And I strongly believe that we need to invest. We need to look to see how well we're doing, what our schools are providing our children, and having that study that we asked for. Simply having a hearing and saying, okay, I've heard it, doesn't move the needle. The reason we're here is to get a commitment from the legislature to actually start that study to see what we need to do. There was a lawsuit. The lawsuit went through in great detail all of the facts that I have given you. And the court said, don't look at us, look at the legislature. And that's why we're here, to get a commitment from the legislature. And I would love to have a commitment today to say, look, we have an issue. We can't stay and say we have to choose which is good, which is bad, which kids fail, which kids do well. We have a commitment, and a commitment is more than watching the status quo go on and on and on. The commitment is on the part of the legislator to meet its responsibility to children. So this is not an indictment of public education. This is an effort for our elected officials to look at what's happening in our schools and create a plan to make great schools for every single child in California.
Do you review the financial reports of the school districts? Do you analyze the CAFRs?
We don't usually analyze CAFR reports. We tend to do at the state level, and so we'll look at state funding in various categories, but we don't tend to look at district spending. There are groups out there like ERS that if you want to see a breakdown, they do reports and they work with school districts and they try to help, look at where the expenditures are going and how does that compare to things like the norm or best practices. But we tend not to do that.
Okay. The reason I ask is because Ms. Kosovar also mentioned the pension issue. So in 2015, the school districts and all the municipalities had to start putting the pension liability on their balance sheets, and then that would reflect now a whole new unrestricted net position, which is now becoming a net deficit. So I just last week decided, after listening to a discussion here, asked how are our community colleges doing in California? 73 districts, 72, 73, 70, 72, and only one had a positive unrestricted net position, only one. And all the rest are upside down. And in the next financial cycle in June of 2018, when those financial reports come out, they will also have to include the retiree medical. So these balance sheets are going to be, LA Unified School District has well over $10 billion in unfunded retiree medical. So we're trying to find funding, but the pension systems and the liabilities and now the retiree medical is just going to, it's already choking everyone out. So maybe as you continue your analysis, maybe finances isn't always your bailiwick, but it's mine. And so, looking at some of these metrics, it's scary. It's scary. The total unrestricted net deficit of those 72 districts was $5.5 billion for this state underwater. And then that did not include $2.5 billion in retiree medicals. That's $8 billion underwater.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're aware of the initiative that's trying to get signatures on the ballot, the California Schools and Community First Initiative, and it does something interesting in this area of school funding. It would reassess commercial property, and it has a mechanism so that 40% of the reassessment would go towards education. But in order to make it more equitable, that money would actually go into the state and be distributed according to the local control and funding formula, so that
districts that need it more.
Districts that need it more, you're directing the money equitably for children who need it, so that just because you happen to live in a very wealthy district doesn't mean pile on more money for that district. It means distribute that money to all of the kids in California, and that does make a dent in what we're talking about. They anticipate that would raise about $4 to $5 billion.
I know you want us to say we're going to give you that $20 billion, but
I'm not asking for the $20 million. All I'm asking for is a commitment to create a plan.
well,
Can I just ask a
quick
challenge to Michael and Emily? Should you come back and give a report, when you look at compensation, would you see if you can get total compensation, salary, medical, retiree, all the components, and then compare that with the other 49 states? And then, yeah, I'd love to have a plan. I've been asking for financial plans from CSU and UC just for 10 years, and I'm not getting the response. So it's.
And when you do that, we also take into account that the average length of time we're seeing teachers teach is 5 years, so they don't qualify under the retirement program. So I think we need all those numbers. in order to get an accurate, honest, straightforward picture of what the costs are.
And I would also add to it, you know, a comparison to what other bachelor's degree positions pay in the private sector workforce. You know, I think that's a germane comparison. If we're,
I have some data that I can send you.
yeah, I mean, I think that tells the complete picture. You know, how do other bachelor's degrees in the private sector compare to what we pay teachers?